forgotten to start. So last Tuesday, I left you with sort of like a teaser of this particular case, which is based on a real case situation, in which in these two Caribbean islands, for over quite some time, several years of a big agribusiness enterprise of planting bananas, they were using this pesticide called Chlordecone or Kepone. And over that period of time, there were some actual harms done to humans because of the contact with the pesticide. A pesticide that ended up being banned in many countries. If you look it up, Chlordecone, you will find how awful it is and why the industry as a whole decided to get rid of it. Yet, in these particular islands, which were a former French colony, there were some regulations in place, and opposite, or at least differentially from what happened in France, where in 1976, the government had decided to stop the use of that pesticide. The French government allowed to continue using that in the islands until the 1990s, and even the plantation owners lobbied the government to even postpone the ban for 3 more years. And over that time, this ended up with Martinique having the highest rate of prostate cancer among men, which were way more likely to be involved and exposed to this pesticide because of working in the fields. Okay. I mean, it is interesting how these things change. So I recently saw the news that France is one of the first countries recently to have passed a legislation that forbids the country to export any product, chemical input that is already banned within the country. So these are all steps in the right direction. But I mean, the same country that decided to allow this in one of his former colonies, then the country who decided to allow the farmers to postpone the implementation of the ban is also a country that today is stepping up in the right direction by forbidding the country, anyone in the country, to export anything that is banned within the country. And I read that recently about France, and I thought that was admirable too. So in a sense, we are all learning and getting there. So with that background, let me put it in terms of the problem that we have in this particular case of the Weevil-kill. Weevil-kill is a fake name that is introduced in this chapter, in chapter 12, which I am assuming that you have been reading. And in that chapter, the idea is to go back and think about the market dynamics, the economic activity that incentivize firms to produce, incentivize consumers to buy things. And we'll be talking here about two particular goods, fish and bananas. And for the planting of bananas, the industry uses this Weevil-kill. It's a weed killer, it's a pesticide that it's critical to maintain the productivity of the field so that you can continue producing bananas. And the firms interested in producing these bananas are rational in the sense of assuming the cost, the extra cost of buying this pesticide and incorporating that pesticide into the production function because it's profitable in the sense that it reduces the losses from the harvest because of pests. So it is rational for these banana growers to use these extra inputs apart from other production inputs, land, money, seeds, fertilizer, labor, etc. And in that particular situation, it happens that the application of this weevil into the fields to reduce the losses from the pests to the harvest also releases the chemical into the water streams, and that water streams flow downstream into a lake, and in that lake there are fishers, and these fishers are extracting from the lake their fish. That's their livelihood. They have their own firm production model. So we can think of these fishers, each of them, as a firm that hires labor, has other inputs, maybe fuel for the motor of the boat and the boat, and they have to pay up costs to covering the nets for fishing, maybe some refrigeration, ice to maintain the fish cold before it hits the market, and so on. And it happens that that pesticide that flows to the river and ends up in the lake is harming the fishery. And for purposes of maintaining it simple, think that this could be either that the fishers are getting in contact with the pesticide and they can get sick, or the pesticide is hitting the water and then it's affecting the biology and the ecology of the lake via affecting the plants in the lake that feed the fish, or affect directly the organism of the fish and it kills the fish. All of these things that I have just mentioned as examples, the fishers get sick or die. The fish suffer in terms of health in the biology of the fish, and eventually they die, or they don't grow enough, or they don't reproduce enough, or the pesticide kills the plants that are the key feed in the trophic chain where the fish eat from. All these things have direct impact in the economy of the fishers, directly or indirectly, because you affect the productivity of labor of the fishers, because you affect the catch the fishers get, or you affect the sustainability of the fishery in the lake so that it sustains a natural reproduction rate so that the fishers can continue their livelihoods out of the lake. And here is where it is key to introduce the idea of private and external costs. So you can think that in terms of the planting costs, if we think of the banana growers, the application of that pesticide, the cost of purchasing the pesticide, the weevil kill, and the cost of the application in terms of the labor from the workers that apply that pesticide, it's all in the accounting of the private costs to the firm in the banana industry. So each firm has in its own internal costs, in its own accounting that they are going to compare against their revenues from selling the bananas to create a profit, which is their main incentive, is going to be there. How much they pay for the pesticide, how much they pay for the labor to apply the pesticide, this weevil kill. And they're going to reap the private benefits from doing so. So they are conscious that they are paying extra money to buy the pesticide and the labor to apply it, but they're going to have that within their rationality because the private gains from more bananas in the harvest, because they control the pest, will more than cover the costs of applying these inputs. And that's part of the system, how it's work in the market economy. So those firms internalize those costs and they rationally decide how much labor to put into the banana growing, how much pesticide to put, and so on, and they're going to make a profit out of that. But there is the second component, which is the external costs. And those external costs are costs that accrue to people outside of the domain of the entity that is causing the costs. And I just mentioned examples. Every day that a fisher cannot go out into the water to fish because he's sick because of an environmental impact caused by someone else, that's an actual cost. It's the opportunity cost of the time that this fisher cannot go out and fish. Every fish that dies in the lake and is not captured by a fisherman, and this fisher cannot get the sale, the income from that fish because that fish is dead, is a cost to someone, that fish or the fishers in particular. Every medical treatment that is required by these fishers because they have to go to the doctor and get treated because of the health issues caused by this pesticide are costs. They are real, true costs to someone else outside of the domain of the accounting of the private entity, in this case, the banana growers. So we have all these costs, private and external, that if you add them together, those are what we could call the social costs. So society, to grow bananas, incurs in costs that are private to the banana growers who benefit from the economic activity, but extra you have the costs that are external to the banana growers, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. They do exist. It's just that they are in the accounting, let's call it like that. They are in the accounting of external actors, external players outside of the domain of the decisions of the banana growers. And these external costs are paid by someone else in many ways that I have just described. But they are still costs. So both the private costs of banana growing plus the external costs caused by the banana growing economic activity, both together add up to what we are going to call the social cost of the activity. Okay? And if you think about it, pretty much every single economic activity that you can think of in your research ideas that you have been working on, pretty much everyone involves a component of private costs that are paid by the firms or the economic actors that are interested in getting that activity going. But there are also external costs that are paid by someone else. So whether it is the technology used by a manufacturing car company, whether it is the type of energy produced by energy plants, whether it is the production, the food production system, whether it is the activity to cut forests to get timber and the consequences of that. All of those involve a component of private costs and a component of external costs. In a way, it's kind of hard to think of economic activities that do not involve external costs at some point. And this is fascinating to me in how the teaching of economics works, because the idea of external costs or externalities is explained further down the road in most of the introductory econ classes. And I am always surprised by that, as if the problem of external costs was a particular special case. And to me, that's hard to digest, because pretty much all activities that human beings have been done throughout history involve interactions and consequences to others beyond the private interests. Sometimes they are conscious, sometimes they were not well known. I can give the benefit of the doubt that the inventors of this chlordecone pesticide at the beginning, I can give them the benefit of the doubt that they didn't know that this was going to create so much prostate cancer in humans. It could be the case. For many years, the tobacco industry thought that it was okay, it was fashionable, it was cool to promote people smoking cigarettes. Then people began to observe data and get concerned with lung cancer. Then research began to explode. Then the tobacco industry began to hide those results. Then the tobacco industry had to recognize that they knew in advance that the nicotine was relevant to the problems of cancer, lung cancer in humans. And finally, again and again and again, as I was saying, and in that I am not optimistic, humankind agreed that cigarettes caused lung cancer, and therefore there are external costs additional to the private costs of producing and consuming cigarettes, right? And one of the most interesting things of the cigarettes example is that at some point, people became fully informed that even if I smoke today, because I have an addiction to nicotine, because I think it's cool, because I want to look cool with my friends, for whatever reason, I am okay with assuming my personal costs to me in the future. So it is more like a game of Juan Camilo today with Juan Camilo in 30 years, right? And it's a two game, and you can think of it as a game theory type of situation. How do I negotiate between the Juan Camilo today and the Juan Camilo in the future? And Juan Camilo today is saying, hey, it's cool to smoke today. And I know that I may increase the probability of Juan Camilo future getting cancer. And I am assuming that cost. And Juan Camilo future say, hey, don't do that, because it's in my own interest that you don't do that. But then Juan Camilo today says, yeah, but it's cool today, and I want to do it, and I am not going to get cancer next week, so don't bother me. And the other one says, yeah, but this is going to happen to me, and it's going to be reversible, and you end up in this intertemporal negotiation between your present self and your future self. The key here is the following: secondhand smoke was the key element for the tobacco industry to find itself in a serious problem, because it's not only that you write down in the cigarettes boxes, as you all know, as mandatory, that the consumption of cigarette is bad for your health. And depending on the legislation of the different countries, they may put pictures of lungs all destroyed by nicotine and so on. The problem was the secondhand smoke. The secondhand smoke is what triggered, and you probably have heard this, how the states in the United States colluded and sued the tobacco industry by saying, hey, it's not only necessary or sufficient that you inform smokers that they are on their own. And this is the libertarian argument. You do whatever you want to your own health. It's the secondhand smoke that is going to cause the external costs to others. So if I sell you guys a product that is harming your own health, but only your own health, and I fully inform you, hey, if you want to use this, you are on your own. But if you consciously buy this and consume it, I should be off the hook because I inform you. But the states came and said, that's not enough, because your consumption of that product creates these external costs to others because of the secondhand smoke, and other people are inhaling the fumes from the smoking, and those people are incurring in severe costs, and they were never asked about it. The smoker was asked and informed, and the smoker is free to use or not that. The problem is when you, with that, cause an extra cost to someone else. And the legal issue was interesting to see how it developed, because the states were incurring in huge costs, medical treatment costs, the state system, because of the increasing cancer, and the states were paying out of their own budgets these external costs caused by that particular industry that had its own supply and its own demand, and yet created these external costs. And the final point on this story of the smoking is really interesting, which is technological innovation. And that is called the electronic cigarettes. Because the electronic cigarette maintains the market to supply the demand for nicotine or for being cool or for whatever reason people like to smoke, without the fumes that have the problems of the secondhand smoke. And as far as I understand, but I don't know the most recent science, the idea of these electronic cigarettes is that they don't cause any harm to secondhand smokers, in the sense that people near you, if you're using one of these electronic cigarettes, are just, if I understand correctly, just inhaling fumes with no toxical components. If that is correct, then the tobacco industry hit the jackpot. And if I understand correctly, the tobacco industry is one of the biggest investors in these new companies for electronic cigarettes. But the whole story of the cigarettes is fascinating, because it's exactly what we're going to be dealing with the analysis of the private costs and the external costs. Because basically the tobacco industry, if they hit the jackpot with electronic cigarettes, they are going to maintain a market in which they can profit from it, and that's valid, and they are in their own right, by developing a technology that reduces substantially the external costs to others. If it is true indeed that the electronic cigarettes don't cause harm to other people that were not asked whether they were okay or not with people using electronic cigarettes. Because for the conventional cigarettes, it's a done deal. It's very clear, secondhand smoke creates cancer, it's harmful, and that's way more difficult to sell. And not surprisingly, why the conventional cigarettes are so expensive. And you can go to states or cities that have imposed huge taxes, and the consumer, when the consumer buys a box of cigarettes, that consumer is paying actually most of the price in terms of taxes, because the external costs are so high, and the governments have been able to impose these taxes on the consumption and production of those cigarettes. And as you know from basic microeconomics 101, that tax, that component of the cigarettes tax, is at the end paid out between the consumer and the seller. They both end up sharing the cost of that tax, because the consumer pays that money covers the costs of the seller, but remember that money goes to the government, and the government is investing that money into creating or funding certain activities that the government needs to do. Not surprisingly, many of the taxes in many parts of the world, many of the taxes that people pay in terms of consumption of recreational goods, so liquor, cigarettes, even cannabis, I believe, the taxes paid to that go directly to fund the health and the educational sector, which is interesting as a social contract. And same here, for example, I don't know in the US, but here in Colombia at least, the lotto system, the lottery system, for which there is a big demand and it's a big market, and it is everywhere. I mean, there are people who basically have a taste for playing lottery and dreaming that they're going to win something that they are never going to win. Yeah, I mean, there was a bumper sticker at some point, and I should have taken a picture, but the bumper sticker said something like, lottery is the tax that people pay for not passing a course in basic statistics. Nobody should buy lottery. It's just, it doesn't add up. But except if you think that those $1, $2, $3 that you spend into the lottery ticket are worth the pleasure and the enjoyment of dreaming that you are going to become a millionaire. Just the cost that you pay for the dream, in the same way that you pay $6 to go to the movies, and during 3 hours they put your mind into a state of a fictitious situation that you enjoy, and it's worth paying that. Anyway, the point with all these cases, tobacco, liquor, lotteries, and the like, is that those taxes are aligned with the idea that there are externalities created by an industry, and that instead of forbidding these industries, which is way more problematic, go back to the history of the US when liquor was forbidden. That's not a nice story in terms of violence, crime, and corruption. So instead of doing that, let's think of taxing those activities that create external costs, which is the bottom line of what I'm trying to say, and in fact use those revenues to pay for public goods that are important for society. And as I said, in many cases, these are used to fund public schools, public health, and the like. So let me now go to the diagram that you're seeing there. And I invite you to actually go to the text, and let me see if I can go here and change once again my screen sharing to the following. Because in the text it's even cooler, because then you can do the animation by yourself in the textbook. So we are in chapter 12. And here's what I'm trying to, here. So here's what I want you to see, what I'm trying to convey here about the external costs. So here in this first graph that you're seeing there, we start with the problem of the private costs in themselves for these banana growers. And again, notice, including those private costs, including there the prices paid by the producers to purchase the Weevil, this pesticide, and the labor to apply it, because that's out of the pocket of the banana firms. Okay? And we are going to build with that a curve that is going to be called marginal private cost. Okay? So first, let me go here. If you can see here you can see my cursor, right? My mouse, right? Okay. So first of all, anyone can tell me why this curve of the private cost doesn't start at 0 and it looks like it's almost $200 for producing 0 bananas? Anyone can give me a good economic reason of why is that?
Because there are fixed costs.
Exactly. Give me an example, Joseph, of a fixed cost, or Thomas. Joseph.
Like machinery or something.
Yeah, exactly. Thinking of banana growing could be a tractor. You already bought the tractor. You haven't planted a single tree, but you still bought the tractor or the land. Okay. Now you start producing bananas, and we're going to be talking about the number of tons per year in those units. And obviously, as the number of bananas are growing, your total costs of growing those bananas increase. Because if you want to grow more bananas, you need to hire more labor, you need to get more fertilizer, more seeds, blah, blah, blah. And out of that curve of total costs, in economics, we like to use the marginal analysis. By marginal meaning, how much more it costs to produce that extra unit. So if you think of a certain level, and we will be looking at numbers, if you think of a certain level here of, let's say, 10,000 bananas, 10,000 tons of bananas per year, the marginal cost for the private entrepreneur, for the firm, is a little bit over $200. But if you think of a yield that is much larger, let's say 80,000 tons per year, now that cost could be all the way up to somewhere $400 in terms of marginal cost. So an extra ton, and this is key here, an extra ton of bananas, if you are in the level of production of 80,000 tons per year, an extra ton is going to cost you that extra ton $400 more. That's what this graph is trying to tell. But again, this is only considering the private costs to the firm. Then, if I click here, now we are going to add what we have called the marginal external cost, which is this orange curve here. So notice, as these banana growers grow and harvest more tons per year, it is very likely that that production is associated with much more use of the pesticide Weevokill. And more production needs more Weevokill, and more Weevokill kills more fish and gets more fishers sick, and therefore is going to create extra costs to someone else. And that is that orange curve. So for very little production of bananas, the marginal external cost, that extra cost to other people who are not within the private accounting of the banana growers, that cost is going to be smaller. And again, we're going to call it marginal, because when we say marginal is how much in dollars it costs to others for that extra ton at those different levels. And that marginal external cost is paid out by other people who are the victims of the negative externality. So if I add up the orange curve with the purple curve, which is the marginal private cost, we are adding up the total costs for society, and we're going to be calling those the marginal social cost, which is this private curve there. So if I stack up on top of the marginal private cost, the purple line, the orange line, I should get the green line. Okay? It's just basic geometry if you want to do it there, or if you want to play with numbers in an Excel, it's going to be the same exercise. So if I go here, click in the next graph, now we have, in this case, the marginal social cost, the green line, which is the total cost for society. And notice how we are always trying to make in economics the analysis from the standpoint of each of the players and from the standpoint of the whole society, because we are always interested in when do those align and they are okay with each other, and when do those collide and then they enter into conflict. Let me remind you of the first experiment of the course, when the invisible hand game of the cars market in a competitive market, those individual and collective interests were well aligned. And that was that first part of the experiment that we did, a good example of an invisible hand game, like the one that you read in chapter 4, by planting cassava or planting rice. In that game, if you remember, Anil Albala, both acting on their own self-interest, ended up in a situation in which both specialized in one crop and both were better off, but society as a whole was also better off. But then you remember Anil Albala making the decision about the pest control technique, and in that case, they enter into what is called a prisoner's dilemma game or a tragedy of the commons game, and then their private interests enter into collision with the overall welfare or interest, the collective interest, and then that didn't align, and therefore they could end up both overusing the pesticide called Terminator. That's what we're talking about here. This Weevil-kill, the more production you have, the more the marginal external costs, and of course, the more the marginal private costs. So for society as a whole, with this green line, this is the actual accounting for the entire society. And that green area that you see in the screen is the punchline of what I'm trying to convey today. The fact that that cost to society, because it is a true cost, the green area is a true cost, is paid out by someone else than the economic entity that created the problem in the first place. That green area has an economic value and it can be put into monetary terms, and the area in green is paid out by society, but is not paid out by the perpetrator of the externality, in this case, the banana growers. But it is a true cost to society. With that in mind, we come to the question of what's better for society? To stop entirely the production of bananas? Probably not, because this situation of stopping the banana production to zero will imply many other costs to society. And you can think quickly in your mind of 2 or 3 examples. Jobs lost, like the case of Italy that I put in Moodle for you that I mentioned on Tuesday, which I found out by digging in the internet that the problem continues in this Tarento city in Italy, because it's a very controversial issue. Imagine that you come as a social planner and says, I'm going to forbid the production of bananas because this pesticide is harming too many people. Or you could forbid the use of Weevil-kill and then reduce the size of the harvest. And therefore, the banana growing firms are going to lay off people, and they're going to reduce their tax contributions to the local municipality. And they're going to be paying less land taxes because the value of the land is going to go down for all these reasons. But that doesn't mean then that the best thing to do is to let things go business as usual and continue creating this harm, because we know that that green area that you're seeing in the screen is a substantial amount of money that is being lost by society. But it's created by one actor and is suffered by several others. And there is no alignment between the two. Or as we say in economics, there is no internalization of these external costs, at least yet. That's where we're heading, okay? So let me then switch gears here for the last couple minutes and go back then to our screen here and go to the next slide, which is the following. Where is the market guiding an optimal solution, an optimal decision, but not anymore as an optimal decision from the standpoint of the firms, the banana growers, but also from the standpoint of society. And here is where classical introductory economics comes to place. And as I said in my plan for the week in my announcement, if you haven't had an introductory course in economics, you may want to go back to chapter 10 in the text and get a refresher or a quick view of this. But there is a key element here, which is kind of a, I'm not going to call it a theorem, but a rule of thumb that says that when price is equal to marginal cost, we have optimality. And there's proofs of this. There are rational ways of demonstrating why when a firm finds itself at the level of production where private marginal cost is equal to the price that the market is providing for those particular goods, the firm is in its optimal level of production. But you need a few assumptions for that to work out. But for the purposes of what we're doing, basically we are assuming that there is a competitive market for bananas, meaning that this particular firm doesn't have a say in what's the market price for those bananas. So this banana grower is just one more firm of many selling bananas. So they don't have any monopoly or oligopoly power. And therefore, if the price of the market is right now at $400 per ton, as let's say it is for the analysis, then the firm is going to apply this particular rule and is going to find the level of production where price is equal to marginal cost. So the firm says, okay, the market price is 400. I am going to go all the way towards my curve of private marginal cost. Yes, and that's this point A, and therefore I should produce 80,000 tons per year of bananas. Again, if you're curious about this or you're not fully convinced, go back to chapter 10 if you want to take a look. But basically, if this firm produces 80,000 tons of bananas per year, this firm is going to maximize its profit. And there are ways of demonstrating that if this firm goes one more ton of bananas further, 80,001, or goes one less ton of bananas lower, 999 tons of bananas, the firm will lose money. And the maximum profits that this firm is going to get is when it produces 80,000, because that's where price is equal to marginal cost. Is this a good business for society? No. And the reason it is not is because at $80,000, 80,000 tons of production of bananas, we have all these extra costs of $270 per ton for society. So notice, per ton. So every ton of those 80,000 tons of bananas is causing a harm to someone else. The first tons of production are causing these extra costs to people. Then when we are halfway, each extra ton is increasing its harm to people. And the more tons are producing, the more harm per ton is produced to people. And the reason for that increasing rate is because pollutants usually accumulate. So if you emit a certain amount of a pollutant into a very clean environment, that very first unit is not going to create that much cost, but that is going to begin accumulating and accumulating. And as the pollution adds up and the ecosystem is not capable of incorporating and processing and degrading that contamination is piling up and creating an extra level of damage to others in economic terms. So for a very polluted lake, because of all these 80,000 tons of bananas, one extra ton of bananas is going to create this $270 per ton extra that is not paid by the banana grower, but is paid by the fishers. Okay? So if this company decides to produce at its efficiency level of $80,000, 80,000 tons of bananas, that last ton of banana, it's harming the rest of society at a value of $270. So those $270 could be the medical bills of the fishers, the foregone revenues from the fish that were dead, or other lost income because the lack of labor that was produced, that wasn't working because these people were sick and they couldn't go out to fish. Okay, so all that together creates a situation in which society loses. And the final point is the following: if we were to think as a society, not as a firm only, but as a society as a whole, and we want to follow this same rule of private equal marginal cost, but in this case it's not private cost, but price equal marginal social cost, then we should be producing here. And that would be somewhere below 40,000 tons. I think it's what the text says is 38,000 tons of bananas. At that point, society as a whole is maximizing its well-being, because society is foregoing all these costs that were not created to society, or that green area is saved, is not anymore cost. Still, society is accruing all these costs, but still at that level of production, the firm is profitable, the firm is making money, and we have eliminated a large part of the damages to the rest of society. And one should be able to demonstrate, and this is what we're going to be discussing next week, why at that point society wins as a whole, and it's worth reducing all this production to that level. But also, it would be socially inefficient to even go further. We don't want to do this, because that would be, it's going to sound paradoxical, but it's going to be too little pollution. And I know that's an uncomfortable way to put it. But when I say it's too little pollution, is that we have sacrificed below 38,000, we're going to sacrifice too much of the economic benefits of the activity. But if we go beyond 40,000 or 38,000, we are going to have, again, too much pollution. So we are in an optimal market decision from the standpoint of society at that point where we should optimize everything that is happening. What we're going to be doing next week, if you complete the reading of chapter 12, is that we're going to be talking about the political forces that drive this possibility to move away from point A to this social optimum. And what do we need to make these two parties fishers and banana growers sit down at the table and come up with a better solution for both, or the government to come in and find a better solution for everyone. And that's going to be the purpose of next week. Okay, so that's it. And thank you very much. Good to see you. And on Tuesday, we will continue with this with chapter 12. So great to see you all.
Thank you.